At 9:17 on a Tuesday morning, the decision was made. It happened in a glass conference room on the 12th floor, where the chairs were ergonomic and the coffee was free, but only if you knew where the machine was hidden. 3 executives sat around a table that cost more than most people's cars. They had charts on a screen and confidence in their voices. They were calm, almost cheerful. This was not a dramatic meeting. No shouting, no raised hands, just a clean agenda and a simple idea. Cut costs. Someone pointed at a line item on the spreadsheet. A quiet role, low visibility, no direct revenue tied to it. The kind of job that never came up in board presentations unless something went wrong. Non-essential, one of them said, tapping the screen. The word landed lightly, like it had done this before. They talked about efficiency, about modernization, about how the company needed to move faster and leaner. They talked about software upgrades and external vendors, about how systems were more resilient now. Someone joked that half the building could disappear, and no one would notice for a week. There was some polite laughter. The name on the spreadsheet belonged to Caleb Turner. None of them said his name out loud. That part mattered later. Caleb wasn't in the room. He never was. He didn't attend strategy meetings or town halls unless attendance was mandatory. He worked 2 floors below, in an office that used to be a storage room before someone realized it had a door and a window. He had been with the company for 11 years. That detail was visible if you scrolled far enough. The executives didn't scroll. One of them asked a reasonable question. What happens if we remove the roll and something breaks? Another answered with confidence. If something breaks, we'll fix it. That's what processes are for. They nodded. That answer fit nicely into the meeting. The decision passed without a vote. It didn't need one. Human resources would handle the rest. At 9:24, the meeting moved on to a discussion about branding. At 9:31, someone mentioned lunch plans. By 9:40, the room was empty again, glass walls reflecting nothing but city light and a forgotten notepad. Downstairs, Caleb Turner was finishing his morning routine. He arrived every day at 8:12, not because he had to, but because that was when the building was quiet enough to think. He placed his bag under his desk, straightened the chair, and checked 3 dashboards in the same order he always did. He noticed a small alert blinking yellow instead of green. He made a note to look at it after coffee. At 9:46, an email appeared in his inbox. Short subject line, neutral tone, a calendar invite attached. Brief check-in, it said. That was unusual. Caleb read it once, then again. He didn't feel alarmed, just curious. He accepted the invite and returned to his work. The alert was still blinking. He opened a log file and started reading from the top, steady and unhurried. Upstairs, the executives were back at their desks, already thinking about other things. They believed the decision was clean. Logical. Finished. They did not know they had just removed a small, silent weight from the system. They would learn what it had been holding up. But not yet. Not on Tuesday morning. Caleb Turner was not the kind of person who stood out. That was not an accident. He dressed the same way every day. Blue button-down shirt, dark slacks, shoes polished but not new. If you saw him twice in a week, you might think you were seeing the same day repeat itself. He liked that. Routine saved energy. It let him focus on things that mattered. Caleb had grown up in a small town where systems were simple because they had to be. One school, one grocery store, one way things worked, and if that way broke, everyone felt it. He learned early that the loudest person was rarely the most useful. The useful ones were the people who showed up early, stayed calm, and fixed problems before they became stories. After college, he took the first job that offered stability. Not prestige, stability. That job turned into another and then into this one. 11 years in the same company, though the company itself had changed names twice. His title had changed too, several times. None of the titles ever explained what he actually did. Caleb worked between departments, not officially. Officially, he managed operational continuity support. Unofficially, he was the person people called when something didn't make sense. Invoices that didn't line up, access permissions that conflicted, automated systems that followed rules no one remembered writing. Caleb didn't argue with systems. He listened to them. Every morning he checked the same dashboards in the same order, not because they were assigned to him, but because he had learned which ones told the truth early. He kept a notebook, paper, not digital, dates on the left, short lines, no full sentences. Yellow meant watch. Red meant act. Green meant nothing, and nothing was good. People sometimes asked how he remembered so much. He didn't. He wrote it down. Caleb spoke softly but not timidly. When he explained something, he did it once. If someone didn't listen, he didn't repeat himself. He simply waited for reality to do it for him. That happened more often than people expected. He took lunch at 11:42 every day, not noon. Noon was crowded. At 11:42, the break room was quiet and the microwave worked faster. He ate the same sandwich 3 days a week. Turkey, no cheese. The other 2 days he changed it just to prove to himself that he could. At 12:18, he walked once around the building. Same route, same pace. This wasn't superstition, it was calibration. He noticed things when he walked, which lights flickered, which doors stuck, which conversations stopped when he passed. He noticed who looked tired before they said they were. Most people thought Caleb was slow. He was. He just didn't rush. When meetings ran long, he took notes. When decisions were made quickly, he marked them with a small star. Those were the ones that came back later. Caleb didn't correct executives in public. He didn't send long emails. If something was wrong, he fixed it quietly and left a short explanation behind, like a trail marker. Some people appreciated that. Others barely noticed. And that was fine. At 9:46 on Tuesday, after accepting the calendar invite, Caleb returned to the blinking alert. He read through the log file again, this time slower. He traced the problem backward, step by step, until he reached the point where human judgment had been replaced by assumption. He underlined the date in his notebook. Assumptions aged poorly. He closed the file, took a sip of coffee that had gone slightly cold, and adjusted his chair. Whatever the meeting was about, it could wait until he understood the alert. Understanding always came first. Everything else followed. Caleb Turner carried things that did not show up on charts. He didn't talk about them, not because they were secrets, but because talking didn't make them lighter. He had learned that early. Some weight only shifted when you moved differently. Every system he touched, he left a small record behind. Not formal documentation. Those were often ignored. These were quiet notes, cross-checks, a sentence here, a reminder there. Things written in plain language, tucked where someone calm might look during a bad moment. Most people never saw them. Caleb knew exactly where they were. Over the years, work had slowly leaned toward him, not by order but by habit. When something was confusing, people forwarded it to Caleb. When something broke late on a Friday, someone asked if he was still around. He usually was. He didn't complain about this. Complaining suggested surprise. Caleb was rarely surprised. What no one noticed was how often he stood between small problems and large ones. He corrected mismatched data before it reached finance. He adjusted access rules before audits noticed them. He rerouted automated reports so errors died quietly in folders no one opened. He never announced these things. He didn't need credit. Credit made things visible. Visibility invited interference. At home, Caleb lived alone in a small apartment with a view of a brick wall and one stubborn tree that refused to die. His evenings followed a pattern. Dinner at 6:40, dishes immediately after, news on low volume, more for timing than information. On Tuesdays, he called his sister. She lived 3 states away with 2 kids and a life that moved faster than his. She talked. He listened. When she asked how work was going, he said, "Normal." That was true. Normal meant manageable. Caleb kept a folder at home, separate from work files, printed pages, old memos, change requests approved by people who no longer worked there, handwritten notes in the margins, written by him and by others long gone. It wasn't a backup. It was a memory. Companies forgot things quickly. Systems did not. They just waited. Caleb understood that the most dangerous failures didn't announce themselves. They waited for the right combination of absence and pressure. He was often that absence's opposite. The yellow alert he had noticed that morning was small. One data handoff arriving 2 minutes later than usual. Most people wouldn't notice. The system itself didn't care yet. Caleb did, because he remembered why that handoff mattered. Years ago, after a rushed update, he had adjusted the tolerance window manually. He had written it down. He had warned someone then, too. That person had nodded and moved on. The note was still there. Caleb opened another dashboard, then another. He compared timestamps, not because they were wrong, but because they were almost wrong. Almost was dangerous. At 10:30, he glanced at the calendar invite again. A meeting with someone from management and an HR representative. 15 minutes. No agenda. He didn't sigh, he didn't speculate. He simply added a small mark next to the date in his notebook. At 10:42, his phone buzzed. A message from someone in finance. A polite question. A system result didn't look right. Caleb replied with a single sentence and an attachment. Check page 3. There was no reply after that. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, not to rest, to think. He thought about the yellow alert. He thought about how many processes quietly depended on a person remembering why something existed. He thought about how often that person was him. At 10:59, he stood, straightened his shirt and picked up his notebook. The hidden weight stayed where it was. For now. By 11:03, the first crack appeared. It was small, almost invisible. A single automated payment failed to process. The finance system generated a quiet alert, red but in a corner of the dashboard that few actually watched. Caleb noticed it instantly. He didn't react with panic. That wasn't his style. He made a note in the margin of his notebook, wrote the time next to it, and traced the alert backward. It wasn't the system. Not exactly. It was the chain of authority. Someone had changed a permission a month ago, thinking it was inconsequential. They hadn't checked the dependencies. They didn't know which dominoes were lined up, ready to fall. Caleb didn't call anyone yet. There was no need. The alert alone wasn't urgent. Urgency comes from context, and he knew the context better than anyone in the building. For the moment, it was just information, a small crack in the surface. By 11:17, the HR representative arrived at his desk. A polite knock. She handed a note from the executive team. "Caleb, please attend the meeting. They want to discuss the ongoing system review," she said. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. Something she didn't understand was happening. Caleb accepted the note without comment. He adjusted his chair. He had already anticipated that they would want him there. He hadn't guessed why yet. That didn't matter. He would observe first, react second. Upstairs, the executives continued their day, unaware that the non-essential line they had circled had already begun to affect operations. They had lunch plans and meetings. They joked quietly about streamlining the building, as if processes were tools, not living systems. By 11:34, the small crack grew. A logistics update failed to propagate across regional servers. A shipment that should have been scheduled was flagged for review. No one noticed yet except Caleb. He checked the affected records and sighed softly. Not a frustrated sigh, more like acknowledgement. He had expected this. These cracks were predictable but still delicate. The quiet humor of it struck him. They had called him non-essential, and yet the system was already hesitating without his presence. He made a small note, irony aging well. By 11:45, a junior analyst stopped by his desk, nervous, glancing over his shoulder. Caleb's system flagged something odd with procurement, not sure if it's a bug. He smiled faintly. It's not a bug, it's context. Check the logs, line 37. The analyst nodded and scuttled off. Caleb returned to his notebook, updating timestamps. This was procedural, not dramatic. No one needed a spectacle. Systems respond to knowledge, not panic. At 11:52, the executives upstairs received the first subtle message. A vendor portal returned an error. A payment authorization failed silently. They noticed it on a casual glance at their dashboards. Someone joked about glitches. The IT department shrugged. Probably just a hiccup, someone said. Caleb's smile tightened. He didn't laugh. He didn't need to. Hiccups rarely remained that small when the structure relied on a single, quiet person who understood every dependency. By 11:59, a second alert appeared, this time from compliance software. Automated flags indicated missing approvals. Operations paused. Nothing catastrophic yet. Nothing anyone upstairs considered alarming. Caleb made another note in his notebook. The small crack was growing. Not breaking anything, not yet. But it was moving through the building silently, as cracks do, quietly, without fanfare. He leaned back in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee. The system was speaking. The executives just hadn't learned how to listen. And that, he thought, was exactly how it always started. By noon, the executives had started to notice. Not in the dramatic sense. There was no shouting, no alarms, no chaos. Just a quiet, creeping discomfort. A dashboard that refused to be ignored. A shipment flagged for review. A vendor unable to process a payment. Probably just a glitch, one of them said. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking slightly as though his confidence alone could make the problem vanish. The system's been acting up this morning. Happens sometimes. Nothing to worry about. That was denial. Subtle, polite, self-protective denial. Caleb had seen it before. Executives believed systems were obedient. That problems only existed if someone said they existed. They underestimated context. They assumed what was visible was all that mattered. Up on the 12th floor, Mark Ellison, the new CEO, checked his tablet while walking past a meeting room. He smiled at a slide titled Cost Savings Overview. He didn't know yet that a small, quiet mechanism he had deemed irrelevant was already exercising authority across the company. He glanced at the time, 12:03. "That's fast," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "They're moving quickly on the review." Someone laughed softly, a human reflex against unease. Downstairs, Caleb observed a different rhythm. He wasn't flustered, not in the slightest. The alerts continued to pile up. They weren't dangerous yet, but they were symptomatic. The small failures he had been tracking now had context. They were connected. He didn't notify anyone. Not yet. No drama was necessary. The system would do what it always did, respond honestly to absent guidance. He simply made more notes. By 12:17, the finance department discovered the second failed payment. Their initial reaction was humor. "Guess the system hates us today," someone said, chuckling. "Maybe it's Monday," joked another, forgetting it was actually Tuesday. Humor in denial is often the first attempt at emotional control. They laughed to mask unease. Caleb noted it quietly in his notebook, denial in progress. He sipped coffee, tilted his head slightly, and read the alert logs again. Every timestamp lined up perfectly. Every failure was traceable. Every intervention, if attempted without proper authority, could worsen things. He didn't need to intervene. He just needed to wait. Systems have memory. People forget. This would teach them both. Meanwhile, upstairs, Mark received a brief email from HR. Vendor portal experiencing temporary error. It notified. He smiled. Another hiccup. Another chance to reassure himself. He leaned back, glanced at the chart tracking cost reductions, and imagined headlines about efficiency gains. "Nothing to worry about," he said again, a little louder. Some of his staff nodded politely. They wanted to believe him. Denial persisted in layers. Some joked, some shrugged, some quietly filed it under temporary system errors. Nobody checked authority assignments. Nobody realized the absence of one person could pause entire operational flows. By 12:41, procurement noticed that approvals they assumed were automatically reassigned weren't processing. They emailed HR. HR forwarded to Mark. Mark called it a minor hiccup and reminded them all lightly that procedures were in place to prevent disasters. It was a plausible story, and it was false. By 12:55, compliance software flagged a third irregularity. Nothing catastrophic, nothing audible outside a dashboard. But Caleb recognized it immediately. The chain was starting to strain. He didn't move, he didn't breathe differently, he just watched, quietly updating his notebook. Denial was a natural human reflex. It reduced immediate tension. It allowed pride to continue uninterrupted, but it did nothing to change reality. And reality, as Caleb had learned long ago, did not negotiate with confidence. It waited. And soon, those small cracks would demand attention. By 1:02 p.m., denial had lost its charm. The small glitches that executives had dismissed were multiplying. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines, but in ways that whispered urgency to anyone paying attention. Dashboards flickered red. Alerts stacked quietly in the background. Approvals froze. Systems paused. Vendors waited. Contracts were unsigned. Shipments delayed. Caleb didn't rush, he never did. He observed, made notes, adjusted a single line in his notebook. Yellow, red, underlined, simple, quiet markers. The spiral had begun. Upstairs, the CEO's confidence was still performing its usual trick. It suggested control where there was none. He tapped his tablet, checked the charts, smiled at a cost reduction slide. "Keep calm," he said, half joking to the CFO. "It's all under control." The CFO nodded politely, hiding the twitch in her brow. She had noticed unusual errors in vendor payments, but she didn't speak up. Not yet. Not until someone more visible panicked. That was how these things worked. By 1:15, procurement called it about an error that prevented payments to a regional partner. It checked logs and shrugged. "Nothing changed on our end," they said. Caleb already knew why. He traced the permissions, confirmed the cascade effect, and quietly noted the time. 1:15 p.m. procurement blocked. Regional partner stalled. Small domino. By 1:22, compliance noticed approvals pending in 3 systems were no longer moving. The software generated an automated alert, red flags across dashboards. Meanwhile, executives still smiled politely at each other, maintaining the illusion of control. Caleb drank lukewarm coffee, not because he needed it, because it marked time. The spiral didn't feel chaotic from his desk. It felt like gravity, quiet, inevitable. By 1:35, client services noticed delays in updates. They called the operations desk. Messages pinged silently through Slack. Each one got an automated response. The requests piled. Nothing was processed. Nothing escalated yet. He jotted a note, escalation optional, natural consequences sufficient. By 1:47, finance reported an unprocessed transfer to a key vendor. A critical contract payment had paused. Not a catastrophe. Not yet. But the math was simple: delay multiplied by time multiplied by exposure. By 1:52, HR called to confirm that internal notices had been sent regarding system errors. They had. They just didn't know why. Caleb made another note: system responding as designed. He observed the spiral expanding. One by one, departments encountered friction, delays, and roadblocks. Each event was small, quiet, unremarkable, but interconnected. He noticed the humor, though he didn't laugh aloud. All those non-essential jokes aging like fine wine. By 2:10, external vendors were calling. Routine confirmations paused, emails bounced, contracts hung in limbo. Upstairs, the CEO finally raised an eyebrow. "Something happening," he said aloud, a touch of tension creeping in. "It says it's just a delay. Finance says nothing's wrong." Nobody had connected the dots. Nobody knew the hidden weight behind the minor failures. Caleb sipped coffee, adjusted his chair. The spiral was working exactly as he expected. By 2:28, the first executive had asked for a timeline on resolution. Caleb noted the time: 2:28 p.m. external attention beginning. The spiral was no accident. It wasn't drama. It wasn't luck. It was the quiet consequence of underestimating a person whose work was invisible until the moment it mattered most. By 2:45, the dashboard for enterprise compliance was saturated with warnings. It and finance teams were frantically checking logs. They were fast, capable, intelligent, but unaware. They lacked context. Caleb leaned back and watched the chain reaction unfold. Each person acted within their authority. Each system followed the rules. But no one had authority over the totality of operations. He made one final note in his notebook for this hour: spiral confirmed. Observe quietly. Consequences will teach lessons louder than words. The spiral didn't scream, it whispered. And yet it was unstoppable. By 3:05 p.m., the calm inside the building had changed. Not drastically, not yet in ways the executive offices could see clearly, but subtly. Whispers replaced the casual jokes. Emails turned shorter, clipped, almost apologetic. Slack channels that had been buzzing now fell silent. Even the most confident middle managers walked slower, checked screens twice, and paused at doors. Something was wrong, but they didn't know what. The first external ping arrived at 3:12. A client, one of the company's largest, called to confirm a scheduled milestone. A small, routine check, nothing alarming on its own. But the person on the other end noticed the hesitation in their internal contact, the pause in responses. They asked twice, then 3 times. Each question hung in the digital ether, unanswered. By 3:17, the regulatory team sent a notification. A routine audit flag had tripped. It wasn't a violation. It wasn't a catastrophe. But in regulated industries, caution is contagious. A single alert can ripple into meetings, emails, and escalations. Caleb read each incoming message without flinching. He didn't panic. He noted the time: 3:12, 3:17, the markers of escalating pressure. He understood that real consequences don't need drama, they need context and authority, and that was precisely what was missing. Upstairs, the CEO, Mark Ellison, started to sense the weight of absent knowledge. He asked it if they could manually override blocked payments. He asked finance if they could release approvals with temporary authorization. HR suggested contacting Caleb. That was the first audible sign he understood there might be more to the story than he thought. By 3:28, external pressure increased. Another client asked for verification of vendor compliance before approving a milestone payment. Legal was CC'd. Emails stacked in unread folders. The rhythm of work slowed, not catastrophically but noticeably. Caleb watched the patterns emerge as he always did. He noted the irony silently. The executive who had dismissed him as non-essential was now dependent on external forces to restore normalcy. The system didn't care about authority or pride. It cared about rules, contracts, and verifiable approval chains. By 3:37, an internal memo circulated. The subject line read, "Urgent. Verification required all pending approvals." The tone was neutral, but the content carried unmistakable weight. Something was broken. Something had to be understood. At 3:42, procurement sent a polite note directly to the board. Something had gone wrong. They didn't know why. They just knew it required attention. By 3:50, the regulator flagged 2 outstanding compliance checkpoints. The external auditor, seeing red flags in the system, escalated the matter. A conference call was scheduled. No one could attend immediately. The time zones were unforgiving. Caleb leaned back in his chair. He hadn't moved anything. He hadn't interfered. Yet every system, every rule, every contract reacted exactly as designed. The quiet weight he had carried for years now revealed itself externally, without fanfare or confrontation. By 4:05, Mark was packing, not in panic but in frustration. The calm veneer of control had cracked. He called his CFO, asked HR to draft a plan. The words non-essential had already begun to echo uncomfortably in his mind. Clients, regulators, and vendors were pressing subtly but persistently. Every question demanded verification. Every automated check needed human authority. And the authority that had been silently present for years, Caleb, was now absent. By 4:17, the company's external counsel sent a message to Mark. Authorization chain incomplete. Immediate intervention required. Mark finally realized that the seemingly small, invisible role he had dismissed was not optional. It was critical, not because of one person's ego, but because systems, rules, and human expectations converge in ways no arrogance can ignore. Caleb watched quietly, observed, not amused exactly, not satisfied either, just aware. The pressure was now tangible, not manufactured, not dramatized, real. And it would continue to rise until those who had underestimated him understood what non-essential actually meant. By 4:30, the first calls from clients turned into requests for written assurance. Regulators asked for confirmation on oversight. The executive team finally faced a simple, undeniable truth. Absence exposes hidden weight, and systems respond faithfully without compromise. Caleb marked another note in his notebook. Pressure, he observed, is an excellent teacher, especially when it arrives from outside. By 4:45 p.m., Mark Ellison finally picked up the signal he could no longer ignore. It wasn't a single catastrophic event that forced his hand. It was the accumulation, the quiet, methodical consequences building across systems, vendors, and clients. The invisible weight he had dismissed as non-essential had manifested in a chain reaction he couldn't control. His first call went to HR. "We need to contact him," Mark said, voice tight but measured. "The one we let go, Caleb." HR hesitated, polite procedural hesitation. "Do you want us to schedule a call?" "Yes," Mark said, "now." By 4:52, Caleb's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A call from a familiar internal number. He didn't answer immediately. He waited, observing the time, noting the pattern. 1 ring, 2, then silence. He knew what they wanted. They wanted guidance, a bridge, a fix. They wanted him to make invisible work visible again. Caleb didn't rush. He had never rushed. He made coffee, not for energy but for rhythm. Ritual matters. It stabilizes the mind. By 4:57, he finally answered. "Caleb," Mark's voice was careful now, cautious, respectful in a way it hadn't been that morning. "Yes," Caleb replied evenly. No emotion betrayed him, no sarcasm, just observation. We need your help," Mark began. The systems, approvals, vendors, compliance, everything is blocked. We don't know how long this will take. Can you guide us?" Caleb let a pause linger. That pause mattered. It emphasized accountability without saying it aloud. He didn't scold. He didn't boast. He didn't threaten. He simply allowed the weight of their misunderstanding to sit in the room. "I can provide guidance," he said finally, "but it has to follow the protocols I established. External counsel has jurisdiction. Temporary fixes aren't authorized. Everything must follow proper procedure." There was silence on the other end. Mark was listening. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that authority isn't something assumed, borrowed, or delegated casually. Authority is embedded in systems, contracts, and human acknowledgement. Remove it, and consequences respond predictably. By 5:10, external counsel was looped in. Caleb explained step by step the procedural chain, which approvals were suspended, which vendors required direct verification, which regulatory checks demanded formal acknowledgement. No shortcuts, no improvisation, just structure. Mark listened quietly. He asked a question here or there, carefully choosing words. Caleb answered simply, precisely. No dramatics, no ego, just facts, cause, effect, consequence. Caleb noticed the irony silently. The man who had dismissed him as non-essential now relied on his calm, precise understanding to prevent cascading issues from worsening. The humor wasn't in words. It was in the situation itself. Quiet, dry, inevitable. By 5:32, some of the smaller issues began moving again, slowly, deliberately. Not because anyone panicked, not because anyone fixed anything incorrectly, but because Caleb guided the process from a distance, maintaining integrity of procedure. Mark realized, finally, that he had underestimated both the person and the system. That morning's arrogance had been quiet. Today's humility was loud, if only internally. "Caleb," Mark said at last, I didn't realize how critical this role was. We should have reviewed the contract. We should have understood." Caleb didn't respond immediately, not with reassurance, not with praise, just a quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," he said softly, "you should have." That was enough. The truth landed without theatrics. Systems responded. Clients were informed. Vendors received verification. Compliance moved forward. By 6:00 p.m., the immediate pressure had eased. Not gone, not entirely, but now it was manageable. The organization had learned a hard lesson. Authority and structure are not interchangeable with confidence or ego. Caleb set his phone down, poured another cup of coffee, and sat back. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He simply observed the calm return of routine. The reach-out had come, and it had confirmed one quiet, immutable truth. Some lessons cannot be taught with words alone. They require systems to speak for themselves. And sometimes, all you need to do is watch. By 6:15 p.m., Caleb had finished guiding external counsel through the procedural steps. The cascade of suspended approvals was slowly stabilizing. Clients were being informed, vendors reassured, and compliance checkpoints cleared. The system, once ignored, had spoken loudly enough to make everyone listen. Mark called again, this time with a different tone. There was still urgency in his voice, but also a quiet humility he hadn't shown all day. "Caleb, we need someone in your role temporarily. Could you come back just until everything is stabilized?" Caleb leaned back in his chair and let the pause stretch. This was the moment he had anticipated, not in specifics, but in principle. He had choices. The easy choice would be to return, to step back inside the walls that had never recognized his quiet work. He could restore routine, reassert authority, and smooth over the chaos that had ensued. But he knew the truth. Returning wouldn't change the lesson. It would only reset the risk for the next overconfident executive. And more importantly, he had realized something else over the past 6 hours. His value was not in being invisible until things broke. His agency, his dignity, his life beyond the company mattered too. "Yes," he said finally, voice calm, measured. "I can advise externally, but only within the protocols and agreements in place. I will not return as an employee, not temporarily, not indefinitely. The structure works. Let it speak for itself." There was silence on the line. Caleb could almost hear the internal calculations, the disbelief, the sudden recognition that authority isn't something to be borrowed at convenience. "But we need you physically in the building," Mark pressed cautiously. "Even for a day, just to help transition authority." Caleb sipped his coffee. Warm, bitter, the pause mattered. "No," he said, simple, clear, final. "You have the structure, you have the process, you have counsel, that is enough. My presence is not required." Mark was quiet. Finally, he said, almost defeated, "I understand, but you're certain?" "Yes," Caleb replied, calm, precise, observant as always. "I've done what's necessary. The systems respond as designed. Let them speak. That is the point of all of this." It wasn't pride. It wasn't ego. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. He had spent years carrying responsibility that went unnoticed, that underpinned every decision, every contract, every approval. For the first time, he could step away and watch those systems reflect reality without his hand in them. By 6:45, the external counsel confirmed that procedures were understood. Temporary fixes were unnecessary. Vendor authorizations would be reassigned according to protocol. Compliance and finance teams were aligned. Everything that needed him had been accounted for, without requiring a dramatic return or heroic intervention. Caleb leaned back, letting the weight of choice settle around him. He could have returned. He could have patched, guided, fixed. But doing so would have erased the lesson the company had just learned. Authority is earned, systems matter, and underestimating invisible work carries consequences. He realized then that some victories are silent. They are measured not in applause or recognition, but in clarity and self-respect. He had not saved face. He had not sought revenge. He had simply allowed truth to unfold. By 7:00 p.m., Caleb closed his notebook, set aside the last cup of coffee, and looked out the window at the city. The office, the chaos, the missteps, they were no longer his burden. He had chosen dignity over duty, boundaries over obligation, and calm over reaction. And that choice felt heavier, richer, and more enduring than any recognition he could have demanded. Because the lesson, once taught, would last longer than any single person's authority. He whispered to himself, quietly, as if speaking directly to the universe. Some work is never invisible. Some lessons don't need a teacher, and I don't need to be the one in the room to make them clear. The line felt right, final, true, and for Caleb it was enough. By the next morning, the office had returned to a semblance of routine. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but in layers gradually. Emails that had stacked overnight began to clear. Vendor releases resumed, one by one, carefully, deliberately. Compliance dashboards shifted from red to amber, then green, as auditors and teams verified each step. The machinery was running again. Caleb, sitting at his kitchen table, watched the sun rise over the city skyline. He had made coffee, toast neatly browned, and opened his notebook, not because he needed to plan, but because habit anchored him. Routine mattered. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about clarity, rhythm, and calm. Across town, Mark Ellison was still in the office. The CEO's office had quieted, but the energy had shifted. His voice carried less authority in meetings, not because anyone removed it, but because systems responded to rules, not titles. Decisions that once flowed through him now moved through committees, external counsel, and operational leads. He was still CEO in name, but not in unchallenged execution. The board, after reviewing the impact of the previous day's suspension of authority, began implementing clearer procedural safeguards. Contingency plans, reassignments, verification protocols, things they had assumed were trivial, were now formalized and documented. The cost of underestimating invisible work had become a permanent lesson. Caleb's phone buzzed intermittently. Messages from former colleagues arrived. Updates, questions, reassurances. He answered some, left others unread. He didn't need to intervene anymore. The systems he had maintained for years were now speaking for themselves. They had learned what non-essential really meant, and they were adjusting accordingly. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not triumph, not gloating, just understanding. Sometimes influence doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it exists in how systems respond, in how human behavior shifts subtly but undeniably. He had stepped away, and yet his impact was immediate and visible. By mid-morning, he prepared to leave for a new opportunity. A smaller team, clearer governance, a company that recognized authority without relying on quiet invisibility. It was a conscious choice, not revenge, not reaction, but agency, control over his own work, his own life, and the recognition he had earned. Caleb paused at the doorway, glancing back at the city's reflection in the glass. The lessons of the previous day weighed lightly, but firmly. He had carried responsibility for years without acknowledgement. That weight had been invisible to most, but now the world saw the consequences of removing it. He walked out without ceremony. No farewell email, no dramatic speech, just steps, rhythm, routine. His badge returned, his laptop handed over. The quiet dignity of leaving on his own terms was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. 2 weeks later, he checked briefly on the company's progress from his new office. Operational holds had lifted. Client confidence was cautiously returning. Systems had adjusted. The company had survived, but differently, more aware, more cautious, more respectful of the work they had once dismissed. Caleb smiled faintly, not for victory, not for triumph, but for clarity, for agency, for the knowledge that some lessons are learned only through quiet consequence, not shouting or spectacle. He made a final note in his journal, a single line that would stay with him. You can remove a person. You cannot remove what they carry. And sometimes letting the system speak is the clearest lesson of all. He closed the notebook, took a sip of coffee, and for the first time in years he did not glance at his phone, did not check a dashboard, did not anticipate chaos. He simply watched the sunlight stretch across the table, quiet, certain, free. And in that quiet, he realized the truth of everything that had unfolded. Authority is not given. It is earned, maintained, and sometimes understood only when it is gone. The lesson lingered, subtle but unmistakable. The company had learned it the hard way. Caleb had learned it the right way, and neither of them would forget.